Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It's me, Matthew again, and I just wanted to do a quick little book review. So I just finished this book called Rome Sweet Home. The subtitle is Our Journey to Catholicism, and it's about Scott and Kimberly Hahn. So I'm just going to read the description on the back. The well-known and very popular Catholic couple, Scott and Kimberly Hahn, have spoken all over the world about their conversion to the Catholic Church. This book tells a full story of their incredible spiritual journey that led them to embrace Catholicism. So basically, I picked this book up from my local church. It was kind of on the bookshelf of like free books that you could take. And it just looked interesting, so I thought I would give it a read. It's pretty short, it's less than 200 pages, but basically Scott Hahn, he was a Presbyterian minister, and so the book kind of takes you through his life, and the first couple of chapters of the book, it's mostly just Scott talking, because it's before he meets his wife, and so talks about his childhood early on, and then each chapter is kind of divided into Scott and Kimberly, which is his wife. So they both kind of talk about their upbringing, but Scott essentially was raised Presbyterian, and at some point, he starts getting very involved in the church, and there was one chapter in particular that I thought was very interesting. He talks about a friend of his where they kind of go separate ways. He decides that he's gonna hang out with one crowd. His friend decides that he's gonna hang out with another crowd. And basically the crowd his friend decides to hang out with is not really like in the church. It's kind of separate from the church. And it's not necessarily like the best crowd to be hanging out with. Anyways, Scott, he's doing kind of ministry work as a young adult, and then at one point he feels called to go to his friend's house just to talk to him, and this is, I think, before he graduates high school, and then he goes to his friend's house before he's supposed to meet at his church for like a Bible study, but he ends up staying at his friend's house for like 2 hours. And then he apologizes to his friend because he's like, "Oh, you were on your way out the door. Like, I'm sorry, I held you up." And he was like, "What were you supposed to be doing tonight?" And then his friend takes out a noose, essentially, because his friend like had been feeling lost and he had been planning on killing himself. And then the fact that Scott took the time to stop and talk to him, even though they had kind of gone their separate ways and maybe not parted ways as the best of friends, there was something that told Scott to go and talk to his friend that night, and that ended up saving his friend's life. So I thought that was very interesting. But long story short, this is basically a tale of two people who were ardent anti-Catholics coming to the Catholic Church. Now, every person has a different spiritual journey, so I'm not here to say that you should become Catholic, but I was raised Catholic. I was in the church, and then, I had my own journey of falling away from the church and then coming back to the church. But essentially, he was supposed to be kind of like a doctor of theology, and he was on track to be a very like prominent Presbyterian minister. And then after he gets married, he decides to convert to Catholicism because from his own readings and his own understanding, he decides that the Catholic Church is the truth. That is the church that God intended, and so he comes to the church on his own, and then he's very ostracized from his friends in seminary who were, maybe Presbyterian or Episcopalian or some other denomination. of Christian, but the Catholic Church was always like the butt of everyone's joke. Like, oh, all these different forms of Christianity, they might not be like the word exactly how God is intended, but at least they're not Catholicism, right? So there was like this very anti-Catholic desire, basically knocking the Catholic Church. And then through patient prayer, his wife even is very against him being Catholic and spends years saying, I wish like you weren't going in this direction because I feel like we're no longer spiritually compatible. And then at some point, I think after his wife has a couple miscarriages, she kind of realizes that maybe the things she was saying about the church were harsh, and that maybe she needs to study the word for herself and study the Catholic Church for herself. So essentially she has a conversation with God at one point, and she says, and God says, like, don't harden your heart to me. If you feel like the Catholic Church is the way that I should be revealed to you, then you need to kind of open your heart and see where this takes you. And then essentially, after like many years of being resistant, she finally comes to her realization of truth and that she does want to be in the Catholic Church. So she comes into the church, and then basically some other things happen, and Scott actually has one of his talks recorded, and it starts selling thousands of copies around the country and around the world. And so now Scott and Kimberly have become a very like popular couple in the Catholic Church, and they spread their faith. But long story short, it was an enjoyable read. Rome Sweet Home by Scott and Kimberly Hahn. If you want a good read about faith and someone's journey, someone's spiritual journey, and then also difficulties that couples face, whether they're religious or not. All couples go through periods of trial and tribulation. But ultimately, it's a lesson that with God's guidance, you can get through even the most difficult of times. So I would encourage you to check this book out, and I appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you next time.